Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second episode in our Critical Creativity in Action webinar series. We're so excited that you are here with us today. My name is Jackie Gardy, and I'll be your host. We also have Chris and Kara with us behind the scenes who will be answering your questions and responding to your comments here on Facebook. This series will highlight the exciting new resource called Critical Creativity in Action. Our presenter, Dan Ryder, and I created this resource with support from many teachers around the world. Critical Creativity in Action is a card deck and a manual containing literacy strategies designed to help EFL teachers add opportunities for creative and critical thinking in their classrooms. We are sharing the link to this free resource in the chat, and we will continue to share it during our webinar. Please share this resource with your colleagues. Throughout these 6 webinars, we'll learn how to incorporate these free materials into our classrooms to engage our students' creative minds. Each session will focus on a different aspect of critical creativity in action resources, so we encourage you to attend as many of these sessions as possible. So what can you expect when you join us for these special webinars? Each webinar will be 60 minutes long. We will focus on one or a few of the activities available in the newest resource for teachers on americanenglish.state.gov called Critical Creativity in Action. And we will explore the materials and activities from this resource, and we will share ways to use this resource in the classroom. And we'll finish each episode with thoughts and ideas for adapting materials from Critical Creativity in Action. Please use the comments to share your questions and ideas as we move along today. We want to hear from you. Please let us know where you're coming from in the chat. The guiding question for this webinar series is, how might we use creativity to help our learners become critical thinkers? Each episode will help us to answer the question in a different way. In today's episode, Shuffle the Cards, we will learn about the details and features of the Critical Creativity in Action series, explore the Critical Creativity in Action Teacher's Manual, and practice our critical creativity skills using the Critical Creativity in Action card deck. So let's begin with this prompt to engage our creativity and get us started today. If we wrote an instructional manual for living a successful life, what would we title the first chapter? So mine might be Embracing Your Creative Side, or A Run a Day Keeps the Stress Away. Type your answer in the chat while I introduce our guest speaker. We are so pleased to have Dan Ryder presenting this series with us. Dan is a design facilitator at the Community Regional Charter School in Skowhegan, Maine, and he teaches science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, English, and design classes in grades 7 to 12. He has 25 years of classroom teaching experience, and he works as a consultant for the Office of English Language Programs. He is the writer of Panels and Perspectives, Creating Comics in the EFL Classroom. He's the co-creator of Critical Creativity in Action card deck, and the co-author of Intention, Critical Creativity in the Classroom. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Dan. It's an honor to have you.
Thanks, Jackie. It's an honor to be here, and I'm so excited to do this next episode in this series. So just as a reminder of what we're up to today, we're going to learn the features and details of the Critical Creativity in Action cards. We're going to explore the Critical Creativity in Action Teacher's Manual, and we're going to practice our critical creativity skills using the Critical Creativity in Action card deck. Now, there are some icons here on the screen that you're going to see throughout our webinar, and let's just briefly review what they mean. So when you see the brain, that means we're going to be delivering new knowledge or definitions or terms to you, our audience. And then we're going to be using the notepad icon to indicate points when we'll provide examples of critical creativity and these skills in action. And then when you see the pencil icon, that's points where we want you as participants to practice the skills that we discussed by creating and making.
And also, during our time together today, keep an eye out for the slides that have the campfire icon that you see here. The campfire icon is a signal that we will be responding to a prompt in the chat. Campfires are used in cultures all over the world for people to share stories, information, insights, and ideas. People gather around campfires to ask questions, create solutions, and make plans. So we will use the campfire icon as our signal today for responding to the prompts.
So let's take a look at some of our responses for the first campfire question. If we wrote an instruction manual for living a successful life, what would we title the first chapter? Jackie, you shared yours. I think I should probably share mine. I think my first chapter would be called Make All of the Mistakes. That's probably what I would start with, because that's what I do all the time. I make lots of mistakes and learn from them constantly. What are we seeing in the chat?
I'm the same. Okay, so we have Saeed saying happiness, just happiness. I like that a lot.
What a great opening, what a great introduction. If you opened a book and it said, this is instruction manual for life, and the first word you saw was just the word happiness, I think that would be outstanding.
And we have live like a champion.
Oh, I love it.
Let's come up with some other ones.
Maybe something to the effect of, what could be like, well, you had a good one about your daily life, right? Like creating every day or something like that. Maybe a daily dose of art will do your body good.
We have Tracy saying doggy therapy for a wonderful life. I want to know more about that.
I want to know more about that too. I was also thinking maybe something like listen to the music in your mind.
Love it. And we have people from Senegal, Pakistan, Myanmar, Tanzania, Havana, Cuba, Ecuador, Pakistan, and Ghana so far that I'm seeing. So continue to put on in the chat where you're from. And let's see, we also have the need for a successful life as a chapter, exploring life, how to be strong.
For successful life. That's such a great, I really like the framing of that. Like this, the first thing would be, why do we need a success? Like, what does that mean? Oh, I think that's great.
Right. And we also have living in a crisis situation. That's a good one. Let's see, we have some more people from Sudan, Pakistan, Mexico, Turkey joining us. And Ricky says,
to have you all here.
Ricky says, expect the best and start with what you have. Love that.
Those are both good. I would do like a chapter for each one of those. Start with what you have.
All right. So before we begin, Dan, could you tell us what you mean by critical creativity?
Well, I sure can. That's a swell idea. It's a great way to start, right? So when we're talking about what we mean by critical creativity, we mean it's what happens when we combine creative expression with critical thinking to develop a deeper understanding and mastery of skills, concepts, and knowledge. So this includes building structures to explain grammar points, or designing clothing to study American culture, or sculpting creatures to practice speaking skills. All three of these pictures came right from my classroom. They all represent what happens in my classroom almost daily. Now, there are many other forms of creative expression besides these, and it's important to remember that critical creativity has very few limitations. What really matters is being very intentional in how we use creativity to help our learners develop their critical thinking skills, especially as they are learning English language skills. So with that in mind, another way to think about critical creativity is that critical creativity allows students to build authentic literacy skills while exercising their imaginations and their creative spirits. I think it's also important to point out that all the photos you're seeing are from Unsplash. And sometimes just the act of picking a really great photo can be a way for students to express their artistic understanding.
Now, before we look at the critical creativity cards and their features, let's think a little bit about teaching manuals and instructional guides and curriculum guides. This will help us activate our needs and concerns as educators and put us in a better place to see how critical creativity and action might help with our instruction. So now we're at campfire question number 2. What are some of the challenges we face when using teaching manuals and instructional guides and curriculum to help us plan our lessons and activities? You can start putting your responses in the chat. It can be anything from time management to, let's see, what's another challenge that you might have? The length of time reading
Oh,
these materials. Dan, what do you got?
well, for me, it's that when I look at a lot of materials, I don't completely understand what it is they're asking me to do. And I find it sometimes difficult to make the transition between what's written on the page into how I would adapt that into my practice. And I also like really, I try to follow the rules, so to speak, of when I read materials that I think are supposed to be really good. And I want to do what they say, but if I'm not sure how to do it, it can make me kind of get stuck and not sure what to do next. So those are big barriers for me when it comes to using teaching manuals and instructional guides.
Yeah, and I know for me, sometimes when I see like the long list of prep materials that I need to come up with, or the supplies that I need for a particular lesson, especially when teaching younger learners, sometimes I just decide, this isn't going to work for me, and then I stop looking at it instead of actually looking at how I might be able to adapt what I'm looking at to fit my own classroom needs. And we also have some great comments from the chat coming in. So Tracy says sometimes the manuals aren't as clear as they should be. A big problem around the world is classroom size. Like a lot of these manuals and instructions are just set up for a standard class of 30, when the reality is many teachers have 30, 60, or 90 students or even more in their classrooms. And Miriam says activities may not be varied or engaging enough or don't have easy to follow instructions. And Fatima says it's often not aligned with the real context.
Those are all superb. Like I'm just so impressed with the thoughtfulness that people have about the materials that are out there. And what you were just saying, Jackie, about so many materials aren't made with real thought given to how many students are in the room at the time, how many educators are in the room at a time. And there's a lot to consider in that.
Yeah, and we also have different learning needs as a concern, and how to put all the information into one lecture. Like there are many things that we can't cover in one lecture or in 1 week plan. That's by Misbah.
Those time constraints are so challenging, and it's not very often that you find instructional materials or guides where they give you a realistic amount of time that it is going to take. They're usually presented in these ideal terms, and it can be really frustrating as an educator. I'm a classroom educator. I work with learners every day. And it can be really frustrating to look at some materials and think, oh, I can do this tomorrow. And then you start to plan it and you say, this is going to take 2 weeks. And I don't have 2 weeks. I have a half an hour tomorrow.
The struggle is real, as they say. Well, let's move on to the next segment.
Oh, that's right. We're going to move into the next part. We're going to really dig into the cards, and we're going to see how these might be really helpful to you all. So we're going to learn the features of the critical creativity cards. And if you attended the first webinar, some of this might seem like review, but there's going to be many more details and many more insights. And if you weren't present at the first webinar, one, it's available, and two, you're going to be perfectly fine. It's going to be just great. You're going to learn everything you need to know right now. So here's how the critical creativity cards work. The deck contains 49 ideas for integrating critical creativity into any classroom. So each card has teacher directions for the activity on one side and 3 questions for students on the other side. There are also icons and colors to help you identify which activities are best suited for particular literacy skills and thinking skills. And there are card numbers and point values to help organize and plan activities. And we're about to take a look more in depth at each one of these features. So those 4 important features of the cards are color, icons, text, and numbers. So color. The first feature most teachers immediately notice is the variety of colors that we use in the cards. We are very intentional in choosing colors that look good together and that are distinctive even when printed in grayscale, because we know color printing is hard to come across. It can be very, very expensive. But more importantly, each color correlates to a level of thinking on Bloom's taxonomy. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Bloom's, it's a system used to organize the complexity of thinking and learning tasks. Here you can see that create and evaluate are higher order tasks, while understand and remember are lower order tasks. They're all important, but the higher order ones are the ones that represent that deeper critical thinking and problem solving that we're hoping all learners get an opportunity to develop in their classrooms. And now if we look at those colors in action on the cards, we can see those cards correlating to levels on Bloom's taxonomy. So Imagine4 is quite a ways up there, and color palette is a create activity. So it's at the highest level of Bloom's. Those more complex ones are going to appear at the top. And so you can use those colors to let you know just how difficult these activities might be for your students. And the less complex thinking tasks appear lower. And those also tend to take less time. So the second important feature on the deck are the icons. You're going to find a lot of them on our cards. We want teachers and students to be able to identify the activities and the thinking involved quickly and visually. We've used several different sets of icons to help us accomplish that goal. So we all know that the 4 language skills are reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And you can see how each is represented here. We have a book for reading and we have a pencil for writing. Now I made a mistake, and remember when I said earlier that I would start my instruction manual with make all of the mistakes? Here's a mistake I made. I have a headphone for speaking, set of headphones for speaking, and I have a microphone for listening. And I didn't change this because I wanted you to see that it's okay to make mistakes. We all make them all the time. And one of the best ways to help learners embrace creativity in the classroom is to show them it's okay to make these kinds of mistakes. Understanding these language skills and understanding these icons will help you to use these cards to develop a really balanced approach to your classroom and help you focus on the language skills that your learners need most. The second set of icons you'll find are the knowledge dimensions. And these are 4 categories of knowledge and understanding that we find whenever we try to categorize the different types of learning and information that our students are experiencing. So factual knowledge, indicated here by some note cards, that's pretty self-explanatory. It includes facts and information and names, dates, grammar rules, that sort of thing. And then conceptual knowledge, indicated here by these 2 arrows kind of cycling around. That relates to big ideas and abstract concepts. So this might include cultural understandings like the American dream, or even social skills like empathy. Then there's procedural knowledge, and we have a map to indicate those. That refers to processes which might include the stages of a conversation or steps in the writing process. And then finally, we have a brain. I love this brain icon. I use it all the time. And this is about metacognitive knowledge, and it's about awareness of how we think about thinking, such as knowing our learning styles and modalities, or how to best organize information so we might access it. So these four categories rather, help us manage that type of information, skills, and understandings that our students are learning in our classroom. And remember, these all appear throughout the deck, and that's why we're reviewing them now, so that when you're looking at the deck of cards, it'll make more sense to you what all these icons mean. And then we have one final set. We have a set of icons that represent Bloom's taxonomy. So we have the colors that represent Bloom's taxonomy, and we have icons. And this helps communicate the level of complexity of the activity when the colors might be printed in black and white, or difficult to identify because the colors faded, or whatever reason, especially if someone has color blindness. We want to make sure these are accessible as possible. So we have a checklist for evaluate, and we have some tools for create. We have some scientific beakers for analyze. We have a finger touching a button for apply. We have a note card for remember, and we have the world for understand. And even though understand falls at the bottom of Bloom's, we want to use the globe as our icon to show that we're talking about global understanding and global communication, and everyone being able to connect together. The third of our four important features is text. Every card has a card title and directions for teachers and directions for students. We try to keep the text as minimal as possible, so everything you need to know is right on the cards themselves. So if you look at the front, you're going to find that each front of the card includes instructions for the teacher, and those directions include how to organize the students, the key steps in the activity, and suggestions for how to conduct the activity. And you're also going to find a lot more information in the teacher's manual itself. We're going to look at that in just a little bit. On the back of the card, you're going to find questions to ask students. These questions include comprehension, reflection, and synthesis questions. Just remember, the questions are not required in order to complete the activity. So if you're feeling that the questions will be too difficult for your students, or that you might not have time to use them, that's okay. The most important part of this deck are the activities themselves. And the fourth and final feature are the numbers. There's a card number and a point value on each card. The card number helps to quickly identify, organize, and inventory the cards. So if they're all discombobulated and out of sorts, you can easily figure out which ones you have and which ones you don't, and easily find the activity you need. And then the point values represent the amount of time needed for the activity of a scale from 1 to 3. 1 point activities are lower complexity, and they usually can be completed in 30 minutes or less. A 2 point activity is about average complexity, from 30 to 45 minutes, maybe as much as an hour. And the 3 point activities are more complex and more challenging, and they might take more than one class period. So if we go back and look now at the cards, we can see all four of these features as they appear. Each feature is there to help improve on how these cards might be used in our classrooms.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that tour of the important features in the Critical Creativity and Action deck. We can see that these cards make use of icons and colors to help us use the deck most effectively. This might make us consider other ways we can incorporate color and icons into our classrooms. This brings us to campfire question number 3. How might we use icons, color, or other visual symbols in our classrooms to help our learners develop the language skills? You can think about how we might do this or how you already are doing this. You might already have a lot of use of color and icons in your classroom, or you might want to explore this. So type your thoughts in the chat. In the meantime, Dan, could you discuss some of the ways that you use icons and color in your classroom today?
Absolutely. I use them all the time. I use them today, as a matter of fact. Just earlier this morning when I was teaching, I was working with some learners and we were using color coding to help us understand a game that they were designing. And we needed to use colors to help denote different actions in the game that they were coming up with. I was also using them in a civics lesson. I was working with a learner and we were looking at the American flag and we were talking about how the colors represent the ideas of how the government in the United States is organized. And so we were looking at those colors. And once we determined that, we started using those colors to mark up a text we were reading when it discussed different forms of government. So using a color code can be a fantastic way to help organize information. But we also used icons in order to kind of stand in for saying a lot of words. We can tell that in my classroom, I tend to talk a lot. And not because I'm lecturing, I just really love talking with learners and I love having conversations with them. But sometimes it's important to be able to use icons to do the thinking for us. Or do the communicating for us. So we'll often do activities where we replace the idea we were going to say with just an icon that we find. Or I use them as
Yes.
organizers. So what are some of the things that other people are saying? Because I could go on and on about both of these.
Let's see. We have Elise saying, I think we can link any information with colors, which I think is right.
Yes.
And then we have Macaire, and apologies if I'm not pronouncing your names right, doing picture descriptions. And Miss Boss says we can use icons to help build vocabulary. Students will try to remember the word that would be associated with the icon. And that's immediately what I thought, in particular with ESL settings. I used to teach adult literacy, adults that weren't able to read in any language. And we used a lot of iconography and pictures to teach at the very beginning with that group of learners.
I love that. They can become icons that you use in your classroom. Like you can build your own set within your classroom that people know, and that people in your students have developed those icons. They've made their own and they share them with others, and that can allow for a shared vocabulary.
Yeah, and then let's see. Tracy says, I use color backgrounds on slides and virtual teaching to show when one activity ends and a new one begins.
Oh, that's a
So
great
that
idea.
is, idioms might have a blue background and our speaking activities will have a different background color. That's excellent. I love that idea.
I love that idea. And I love the idea of keeping them consistent across all of your classrooms and all of your teaching, so that as you're using materials again with a new group of learners, you have that consistency, but it also allows learners over time to develop the fancy word I think is automaticity. It's a
Yes.
big word, but this, as soon as you see it, oh, this is where we start, right? Because the first thing to do is always in green. And that's what we tend to use that here, because on our street lights, green means go. So we're always using green to indicate where to start or where to grow from.
Absolutely. And let's see, we've got a few others here. Let's see, Miss Spa says icons can help to develop language learning as a creative process. And Umulawara, apologies if I'm not saying your name right, icons may help in scanning, understanding, and remembering what students have read.
Yes. I love to use
See,
icons as a markup tool. So you draw the little icon and the symbol in the margin to help you identify quickly what that which concept was showing up in which part of a text. I absolutely love it. I think it works so well.
We have so many more. They're so great. I'll just do a couple more before we move on to our next part. Nazu says, one color for main points and the other for writing sentences that contain links and ideas.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. I used to
I think we
use
can all learn from each other here on this webinar. I'm getting some great ideas right now too.
absolutely. I used to mark up my students' writing using different colors of highlighter, but I tried always to be very careful to not use red because it has such a negative connotation for my students here in the United States. When they see red, they assume it's automatically going to be bad. So I try to use other colors. So one of my favorites was to use orange. And I spoke about this in an earlier webinar and some other ways I use it, but I love using bright orange because learners around here are hunters, and we use safety orange to keep ourselves safe in the woods when we're hunting. And so many of them do that. So they know immediately that that's something they have to pay attention to when they see those little orange highlights.
That's really interesting. I'm sure that everywhere else there's other colors that symbolize different things, and they might be culturally known in your country, and you can use those colors and symbols in your classroom as well as to set up a general understanding amongst your students. So there's so many great posts and great responses here, and we'll keep going with that. But the next goal of this webinar is to explore the critical creativity and action teacher's manual. So we're going to be looking at the wide variety of information and insights available in the manual. As a reminder, the manual can be found as a PDF on the American English website in the same location as the cards.
So the teacher's manual is here to help learners get the most out of the deck of cards. Throughout the manual, teachers will find suggestions that help them implement these cards into their classrooms.
And the most important suggestion of them all is read and use the teacher's manual. It is full of insights and understandings, as well as many strategies we are about to discuss. You can download it digitally and have it on any of your devices. You don't have to print it. You can just use it directly from your phone if you have access to that.
Absolutely. We couldn't have possibly put all of the suggestions and ideas that are in the manual into a 1-hour webinar. So we really want to encourage everyone to use it. Jackie put in just a tremendous number of features into it. She kind of was she was the editor of it and masterminded how that manual looks and works. And the feedback we've gotten already is just tremendous on how useful it is. So if you want to use the cards to the best of your ability, really explore that manual and see all of the ideas that we've included in there for you. Now let's take a look at some of those strategies that we have in there because they're intended for a wide variety of learners. There's ideas for teachers who are teaching in grades K through 12. There are ideas for adult learners. There's ideas for advanced language learners. Every type of student can benefit from the activities that are here in the critical creativity and action deck. So let's take a look at a few of those suggestions. Like this one. This one's called Cut Up Creativity. And in this one, you provide students with a collection of discarded magazines or newspapers, books, or other English language material, and you have them find interesting words and phrases, and then they rearrange those words and phrases into statements or poetry about a topic or an idea that you give to them. So you could use this with all sorts of learners. You could have compares and contrasts. They could look for similarities and differences between perspectives that they share with one another. There's a lot of ways that you could use this activity as a starting point to further ideas.
Awesome. And I think we're going to go into this a little bit deeper just a bit later in this webinar. So
We
let's
are
look at
actually
advanced
participate in that one.
And let's look at advanced language learners who could use strategies such as say it in 4 ways to study current events in the world or practice nuances of tone and meaning when speaking aloud.
And in a K-12 classroom, learners might be given a collection of cards that have a variety of activities, and they're given an opportunity to make self-selection. Learners can choose activities that work best for their learning styles and modalities.
Yeah, and this is great. This is a great way to do it when you've got the fast finishers in your class. You know, the students that always seem to get the assignments done first, and then they get a little bored, and then they get into trouble. So this is a great way to help stave that off and keep your learners focused while your other learners are still focusing on the main activity.
That takes
So this takes a, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Jackie. I think we were both going to talk about the same thing. Go for
I
it.
think so. This takes us to another helpful section of the manual. The teacher's manual includes many suggestions on how to play the cards. In fact, there are so many ways. We have planned an entire future webinar episode dedicated to using the cards just as a game.
So there are 2 ways right here that we can use the point values to plan activity. So one is a 10-point week where you go through the deck and you select 10 points worth of cards from the deck. And that provides about 4 days worth of meaningful activities for your classroom. Another option is to do what we call the Sweet 16. You lay out a 4x4 grid of cards, and each row represents a week of instruction. And I would suggest rearranging the cards until each week has approximately 10 points worth of activities.
Now, the card numbers can also be used to organize ways to play the cards. So the teacher's manual includes a number of themes that the cards may represent. So for example, cards 4, 49, 47, and 7 all work very well with nonfiction articles and texts about current events, which we called in the news as a thematic unit. Some of the other thematic units in the teacher's manual include music festival, art gallery, community meeting, and construction site. So there's lots of creative ways that you can combine these cards to set a theme for learning for the week or for the day.
Inside the manual, you're also going to find skills matrices. These matrices help identify the activities that are best aligned to each of the 4 essential language skills: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Here you see the reading skill matrix. You can see that they are color-coded, right to Bloom's taxonomy, and are numerically in order so you can find them easily in the deck. These matrices also help teachers quickly identify activities that best align to the different levels of Bloom's because they use the same color coding system as the cards. In the manual, you're going to find a matrix for each of the language skills.
And the teacher's manual includes a detailed guide to each card. So this includes the language skill, the thinking skill, and knowledge dimension for each card, and an introduction to each card, and images of the complete front and back of the card, and extensions and ideas to increase the impact and scope of learning with the card. So in a future webinar, we'll be looking in depth at these extensions and how to turn these activities into projects that last a week or entire term. And all of the extensions, most of the extensions are tied to americanenglish.state.gov. So we've carefully picked out extensions that you can do with the resources that you have on hand. No extra purchasing of textbooks or anything else.
So now we're going to practice our critical creativity skills using the critical creativity in action card deck right here. This is going to help us see these features and all this information we've been talking about in action. And before we do that, we should pause for a second and think about the students that we work with in our classrooms.
Yes. So for campfire question 4, We'd like to know which of these thinking styles best describes your students. You can select as many styles as you feel accurately describe your students. And please type your responses into the chat.
So let's look at these for a moment and just quickly identify what each of these thinking styles are. We have this I with a little thought bubble above it, which stands for visual thinkers. Then we have two speech bubbles for verbal thinkers, people who think best when they can express their ideas in words or hear them in words. We have physical thinking styles, which is represented by this hand grabbing an object for those learners who are more kinesthetic or tactile and really need to move objects around or themselves in order to learn. We have social with 4 different people connected, representing the idea that some people learn best when they can bounce ideas off of one another or when they're learning in groups. And then we have concrete, which is represented by these bricks. And this idea is that there are some ideas that, and some learners who just need to see things straightforward, black and white, very clear. Then there are others who are more abstract in their thinking, and that's represented by this sort of fan or flower or pinwheel. There's a lot of different ways to interpret this image. I also think it looks like slices of orange or maybe phases of a moon. There's all sorts of things happening here. Smiley faces going in a circle. There's all different ways to think about this image. And that's abstract thinking and abstract reasoning. And some learners learn best when they're allowed to make metaphors or interpret symbols. So when we think about our learners in our classrooms, which of these thinking styles best describes them?
We've already got some great answers coming in through the chat. So Tina says social, physical, and visual. And Justin says more visual, and Monica says visual verbal. Let's see, we have Uma Lawara. Usually I keep a variety of activities since I have learners with different learning styles. So it's all of them for me.
That's excellent. When we think about traditionally what we see for materials in the classroom, usually we see a lot of verbal. But when we ask teachers about what their students think and how they best learn, it's almost always visual and physical. So we have to keep that in mind. And what we're hoping is that these critical creativity experiences are going to help bring in more of those visual and physical and abstract and social experiences that we know that our learners think using, but that so often materials that are provided to us don't reflect.
Definitely.
Up there, Jackie?
Yeah, we still have a lot coming in. It seems like there's a real variety of different thinking styles. And I think one of the most important points here is that just to think about how our students might be thinking, how they might best apply information that they're learning in the classroom goes a long way to us being able to differentiate our teaching to individual learners despite having large classes or other challenges.
Absolutely. And that's why it's important to find resources that allow us to manage all of those differences. It can be overwhelming and daunting if we feel like we have to take every lesson and make 10 or 12 or 15 different lessons from that one. There are ways to find commonalities across learners, to find strategies that work for not all, but work for many, and then making those adjustments. The more universal we are in our design and thinking about all the learners in our spaces at once, the more likely we are to be able to make that one lesson that does meet so many needs all at the same time.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? I think it's time to try one of these right here with our audience.
Let's do it. I think it sounds like a great idea. We talked about using cut up creativity earlier, and I think that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to use cut up creativity, which happens to be card number 29. It's a create activity. So it's pink, right? Falls at the top of blooms. We can see the icons on the top let us know that this involves reading and writing skills. And if we look at the icons at the bottom, there's our create tools, and there's our brain icon letting us know this is also a thinking about our thinking, right? Getting deep inside of our knowledge base. And this is a 2-point assignment or 2-point activity, which is it's important to note that we're going to try to do this in 5 minutes, maybe even less than. So we think that our participants can do it. And so we're excited for this challenge. But if we were going to do this with our students in the classroom, we'd give them at least a half an hour and probably more like 45 minutes to do this activity in total. So we're going to look on the next slide at this collection of excerpts and headlines. And what I'd like you to do as I read them is make note of the powerful words and phrases that you see and type them into the chat. So here we go. Beyond words, how art is unlocking new pathways to understanding. And in a world that often feels divided by language, culture, and geography, empathy has emerged as a powerful tool for bridging the gaps in global communication. And finally, revolutionary AI solutions, transforming the world by solving global challenges. So take a moment, look at those words, and in the chat, type in the ones that really stand out to you, the ones that you think are the most powerful or important, or as I call with my students, the sparkle ponies, the ones that make you just go, wow, that's an important word. What are people noticing?
Well, let's see. For me, definitely, I would say new pathways is definitely popping out at me, and some more powerful words like revolutionary and transforming,
Yes,
bridging. Those are all really strong words for action.
I key right in on empathy. That's the one that like immediately pops out to me. And it may seem very simple, but the word art it's a 3-letter word. It's very short, but it's very powerful because it means so many things. So when I see that, and then that's followed by unlocking. And so I've really got to think like the act of unlocking seems important. So let's look at the next slide. And I'm sure we have participants putting lots of ideas in the chat, right? Lots of words. Here's some of the interesting words that I identified before, and I bet you're going to see some of the same ones that have been identified in the chat. We have beyond and revolutionary, empathy, new pathways, communication, powerful, gaps, transforming, unlocking, right? And what we're going to be doing is taking those phrases, take the same words that you found as well, and you're going to rearrange them and remix them into powerful statements about teaching and learning. So for example, I made one that says revolutionary empathy creates powerful pathways to a new beyond. And then I made another one that says unlocking new communication transforms empathy. So now it's your turn. Create one of your own, put it into the chat, and let's see what you come up with.
Yeah, we've got a lot already, and we've got some words popping out for people. So we have empathy from Irene and Lynn, and transforming. Monica says transforming the world. And Uma Lawara says global challenges, pathways, global communication. Tracy says transforming, unlocking language, culture, tool for bridging solutions, and global communication.
That tool for bridging solutions. That's a really cool phrase.
Let's see. And Mitan says language and culture bridging solutions. I like that a lot.
I love it. These are great. Keep them coming. And also, I'll be on the Facebook group, the American English for Educators Facebook group this week. So keep these coming and share your ideas there as well, because we want to see as many of these examples of cut up creativity as we can.
Yeah, well, we've got time for a couple more here, and then we got to move to our second activity. So, Anu says, communication unlocks new pathways to bridge gaps.
Oh, that is so great. Communication unlocks new pathways to bridge gaps.
Yeah,
So much active language in that.
let's see. And then we have Fatima says, empathy creates powerful pathways to unlocking gaps of communication. So it seems like we're all kind of on the same page here.
We are. We're like, and we're finding. I love that people tuned in onto empathy, and this idea of understanding other perspectives is so important, and that it solves problems. It fills in spaces. It gets us from one
Yeah,
place to another.
and the last one here before we move on is Ricky says, we create our own path as we go along. We are the result of what we have thought about in the past. Start with what you have, step forward, and start to believe in your potential. We all have that something powerful inside. Wow.
Wow, that is great. That is so great. So keep them coming, and let's try one more activity before we have to wrap our webinar. We're gonna use this one as a little bit of an exit ticket of sorts. I know several people are used to an exit ticket that's a few questions. This isn't that way. This is a little different. So see what you think of this one. This one's called the Icon Challenge, and it's slide 37. It's a green, so this is an applied knowledge, and we're going to apply our knowledge of iconography and our knowledge of this webinar to address this challenge. This is going to involve some more metacognitive thinking, and you're going to have read a text, but sometimes we also think of, in this case, we're going to use it as a listening activity as well, because you've been listening to this webinar, right? So if this was a different classroom, we might add the headphone icon on there just for the moment, because this text happened to be something that you listened to. So this is what's going to happen on this one. On this next slide, you see 8 different icons, and each one of them represents a different concept or idea. And what we'd like you to do is select 4 of them, or 3 of them, 3 or 4, and arrange them in a way that provides a summary of what you're going to take away from today's webinar. And then describe that arrangement in our chat. So you can just use the numbers to say which ones you would use. And I'm going to show you some examples here on the next page, or next slide rather, right? So at the top, I said, like, today's takeaway for me is, if we plan using the blueprint and we think thoughtfully about that plan, then we can create amazing solutions and amazing pathways towards understanding. So that's the 1, 4, and 3 for me. And then there's a 2, 8, and 7, which is the idea of creating art connects us to one another. And these cards are going to allow us to express ourselves in ways that improve our thinking. So there's 2 different solutions to this icon challenge that I created, and I'm really curious about what others would come up with.
While we wait for those responses to come in, I can think of a couple here. So I can do something really simple, which would be 4, 8, and 5. So using my brain and communicating with others while playing and working with these cards.
Oh, that's great.
So I would put in the chat 4, 8, 5.
4, 8, 5. I could do 5, 8, 4 in reverse. So using these cards connects me to other people, and that improves my brain.
Ah, like that.
Or the brain of our students.
Yep. And this is something that you can do in a lot of different ways. You don't need the cards necessarily to do this. So if your classroom consists of just a chalkboard, you could actually draw these icons on your chalkboard in a way, and like block that off on your board, and use that as an exit ticket. So you could ask your students, you could have a bunch of different icons, and you could ask your students to summarize the lesson using the icons that you've drawn on the board, or you could even ask your students to draw the icons then you decide as a class what icons you'll use to summarize each lesson for each day.
Absolutely. You could even do something with putting them on the board and then covering them with a piece of paper so that like you eliminate some, right? So they can be in an arrangement and you could say, which ones would you remove? Which ones don't fit? Which is just another higher order thinking to decide to make those evaluated decisions about what's a good fit, what makes sense and what doesn't. And that helps a lot with thinking about context.
Absolutely. And we've got a bunch of different combinations coming through. So maybe after the webinar, Dan, you can make some comments on this chat to respond to our participants.
I'm really looking forward to over the next week. I'm going to be on the Facebook group, but I'll be on there. If not right away, I will be on there shortly.
Awesome. So to summarize what we're able to think about and do our webinar, we learned the features of the critical creativity and action cards. We explored the critical creativity and action teacher's manual, and we practiced our critical creativity skills using critical creativity and action deck. We did a lot in the past hour.
Yes, we did.
For our final campfire question, we want to ask you, and this will extend past the webinar today, but what are some questions about critical creativity that today's webinar prompted for you? You can be thoughtful about answering this, and if there's something we didn't cover that you'd like us to cover in the next webinar, please add that to the chat so that we can incorporate it into the next one of this series.
Absolutely. We really want to hear from you, and we really want these webinars to be as useful for you as possible. Is there a quick question that you see coming through that I might be able to answer?
Don't know about quick. I think that there's still some
really
questions.
Thoughtful. This has been such a thoughtful group of participants. I imagine that they're all really like insightful and thoughtful questions.
We have so many great responses all along, and I was only able to highlight just a few for each question that we had, but our audience has been just amazing and worldwide, and that's really exciting.
Oh, it's so exciting. And I'm not surprised because that's what this audience is usually like. The participants in these webinars are usually super engaged, super insightful, and just wonderful human beings.
Okay, so I wanted to personally thank you all for attending today. We've had wonderful conversations, and your contributions in the chat have made this all possible. As a reminder, this is only the second episode in our webinar series for critical creativity and action. Our next webinar is going to be on July 18th, so mark your calendars. We hope to see all of you there and your colleagues. And be sure to visit americanenglish.state.gov and download the Critical Creativity and Action cards and manual. They're ready to be used in your classrooms today. And if you are outside of the United States, if you would like physical copies of the cards, please reach out to your regional English language officer and request them. And many of the ideas found in Critical Creativity and Action are from Dan's book that he co-wrote with Amy Burville, Intention, Critical Creativity in the Classroom. Amy was instrumental in leading this worldwide pilot of all of these cards, and she created the preliminary design prototypes for Critical Creativity in Action cards. And I wanted to personally thank Dan for all of his insight and hard work on these cards and on these webinars. We couldn't do this without you, so thank you. And thank you to the team behind the scenes that make all of this possible. And as Dan said, he will be regularly visiting the American English for Educators Facebook group during the next week, and he'll be answering more of your questions. Please join the group if you have not and continue our conversation. And our next webinar will be on July 18th. We hope to see you all there. Thank you, Dan, and thank you everyone for being here today.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for participating.
Hope you have a great day, great night, great evening, wherever you're coming from.